After ending your relationship with a narcissist, you want to quickly move on. You want to close that chapter, you want to forget them, and you want to start fresh. There is nothing wrong with these wants and desires because you see the narcissist being able to do so very easily. They have moved on with their new partner, they don't think about you, they are not bothered about your pain or suffering, they don't care. They don't care if you live or die. So you ask yourself, why should I suffer? Why do I need to go through all of this when they have just completely erased me from their memories? Fortunately, I would say you are different than them. They look completely devoid of you because they never attached themselves with you, which is why there were no cards to cut. But for you, it was a completely different story. You are a human being capable of forming connections, attachments. You are a human being who gets to experience love, who gets to give love, who gets to know what it is to be vulnerable, who gets to connect at a deep soul level. They do not have that capacity, which is the reason why you feel so depressed, and no matter how much you want to, you're not able to quickly get over it, and you won't be able to do so. Your depression after narcissistic abuse has a purpose, and you have to go through it. You have to move through it in order to move on. Why and how? Let me explain in today's episode. Hi, I am Danish, a narcissistic abuse recovery professional. Today's episode is going to be all about understanding the purpose of depression after narcissistic abuse. If you're eager to know what this purpose is and why you feel so depressed and how you would heal, how you can get over this depression, please stay until the end and make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, because your subscription to this channel helps spread awareness about narcissistic abuse. To lay the foundation for this episode, let's watch a small video clip together and let's try to understand why this depression has a purpose, what is its reality, and so on.
Depression after narcissistic abuse has a purpose. It is complicated and complex grief in disguise. You have to process it. You have to move through it and not run away from it, not avoid it, because you are grieving so many losses at once. You're making peace with so many realizations. And that is why you have to give yourself time. You have to give yourself space and just process it. That sadness that feels mountainous, that feels so heavy, you just have to stay with it and understand that in chunks, pieces, and patches, it will slowly go away, and you will have that delayed realization that will ultimately take you through the process of realization and moving on, and you will come out healed on the other end.
Now, in that video clip, I say your depression is complex and complicated grief in disguise. You need to understand that grief after narcissistic abuse is far more complicated than the traditional grieving process. Now, I am not undermining other forms of grief because every form of grief is unique and there is no comparison possible. What I'm trying to say here is that this takes more time. You have to go through a lot in order to move through the process and complete it, and this process is not linear. Why so? Because think about this for a moment. After leaving the narcissist, almost every single survivor struggles with two things: cognitive dissonance and trauma bonding. Imagine a person who struggles with this dichotomy of one, thinking that probably the narcissist was not such a bad person because they are confused by those good memories. At the same time, also realize that this relationship was tumultuous, it was filled with adversities, it was painful for them, and there is this inner conflict going on. While they know they have left the relationship, there is no going back, and there is this enormous sadness they are struggling with. This internal split, this confusion is called cognitive dissonance, and the urge to go back to them so that they can feel relaxed, so that you can feel regulated, is of Herculean strength. It's extremely difficult to break a trauma bond. And then with that goes this sadness, which makes things worse. If a person is struggling with all these emotional and psychological difficulties, how would they be able to, one, fully see the narcissist for who they are, two, overcome that confusion, three, deal with that sadness, and 4, break that trauma bond, break that addiction, and completely leave them, get over it quickly, and just act like nothing has happened. Is it possible? Of course not. It's like your mind, body, and soul are constantly burning. You're on fire, and you don't even get the rest of a single minute. You're constantly dying at the same time taking, a form of rebirth. You are dying and then coming to life because a part of you is realizing that it wasn't real. You're seeing through those memories. You're understanding things. You're dissecting that relationship. You're finding out your truth, basically what happened to you. And by doing that, you go through a process of, I would say, a similar, akin to death, yet at the same time, this other part of you is taking birth with these new realizations, with new understanding. And the painful thing is, this realization doesn't come easy. It comes in patches and bits. It's not that you see the whole picture, the big picture at once. No, you're able to see the little patches and bits of it. You're able to see the connection between the dots, and with each connection that gets formed, you are taken aback. You are burdened with that sadness, because that sadness comes from the realization of so many losses that you have experienced in that relationship. The loss of yourself, the loss of time, the loss of opportunities, the loss of love, the loss of efforts, the loss of trust, loss of emotions, the loss of concept of the family that you thought you had, the loss of the future that you thought you will have with this person, the loss of the idea of this person that you had before because they were not the person who they pretended to be in the love bombing stage, the loss of your health, the loss of your emotional stability, the loss of your friends, the friends that you lost in this chaotic cycle of the narcissistic relationship, the loss of family, the loss of so many things, because I can keep going on and there would be this never-ending list that I could potentially come up with. So these all losses are not easy to make peace with. When you're realizing these things, you are hit with one brick after the other, and you have this enormous sadness that you feel so overwhelmed by. Actually, this sadness then turns into complicated grief, because if you are sad and if you are going through this realization, but then you go back to the narcissist, you break no contact, and there is more cognitive dissonance, more traumatization, you never are able to complete the cycle of grieving, which then basically creates this mess. So this depression has a purpose. This depression is complicated grief. You're not able to get over it easily. So what is the purpose? The purpose of this depression is to help you realize that it was all a lie. The only thing that you have to do is do not try to just get over it quickly or try to resolve it by going back to the source of your pain, because the source of your pain cannot be the source of your healing. If you keep going back while you're trying to resolve this depression, you will end up finding yourself even more depressed after going through this one more cycle of abuse. Instead, you have to sit with this depression. You have to go through this process of rebirth, which is extremely painful, excruciatingly painful beyond words, but you have to go through it, because by going through it, you will then be able to come to terms with your reality, come to the point of acceptance that yes, it happened, and unfortunately I experienced all of those losses, but now I can rebuild my life. I can be the person that I have always wanted to be. I can have stronger boundaries. I can do this, I can do that. I mean, all those things. Yes, would that compensate for what you have experienced? Of course not. But life has to move forward. You have to move forward. And you can only do that by processing this properly and completely. So your depression is basically a sign from your body that it has initiated this process of mourning. Mourning a person who for you is dead, completely dead. They never existed. But with your eyes, physically in this physical world, they walk, they talk, they eat, they breathe. which also is the crazy, which also creates so much confusion because you see them, yet for them they're gone, they're invisible. So that is this added complexity to the process of grieving, which you have to make peace with, that the person you see is a stranger. You never met the real narcissist, you never connected with them, you never knew who they are. Who they were was nothing but a mirage, an illusion they cast to trap you. You also need to understand that while you're going through this stage of depression, you also go through the stage of delayed realization, because it's a lot of back and forth. You realize a couple of things, but then you go back into denial. Denial is a major part of the grieving process. In fact, it is the first stage. So it's not all at once, as I said earlier. You see a little bit, a little glimpse of who they are, of what you have experienced and what your reality is, but then you step into denial, and the whole cycle of justification through cognitive resonance is triggered, and you go back and forth. And this back and forth, this complicated cycle of grief after narcissistic abuse takes a long time, which is why there is a concept called disenfranchised grief. That is what you go through. This process of grief is not recognized by the society, by people around. Your family and friends may get impatient at a certain point, and they might push you to quickly move on, to get over him or her. Why do you keep thinking about this? Why do you keep this in your mind all the time? Why do you have to talk about this person if they hurt you so much? Why this and why that? And that push can isolate you further in your grieving process, making you feel even more depressed, because then you become disenfranchised. This process is not recognized. The society wants you to take a couple of months, but then forget and act like you're okay, and step into this dating pool, which basically is nothing but a pool of sharks, especially nowadays, and then just be okay. But that never happens. So it is your responsibility to give yourself time and space. And when I say time, I don't mean a couple of months. Sometimes it takes years. So on an average, a year and a half or 2 years, you have to give yourself to go through this process and truly be able to accept what has happened to you. Because what happened to you is the worst thing that a human being can ever experience, in my opinion. It's the worst thing. It's beyond a moral wound, a soul injury. It was like proper and full annihilation of your identity, of your personality, of who you are inside out, and now you have to recreate yourself, which is not an easy process. You have to make yourself come to life again, and that takes a lot of efforts. That takes a lot of healing and a lot of support. Having that said, I would like to conclude with this one thing. Depression is your friend after narcissistic abuse. It's not a disorder. These medications, now I am not anti-medication, but SSRIs and other stuff may suppress it, but actually you will have to go through it. It might be really difficult to sit with it, to be with it, and to just bear that sadness, because it gets too overwhelming. And for that, you might need therapeutic support, proper understanding, proper hand holding, which is okay. But just finding an alternate way that just kind of helps you to escape it is not possible. There is no other way but just moving through the fog. Unfortunately, that is the only way to get out and to heal. With that, let's end today's episode. I hope you found it insightful. If you did, please let me know in the comments. I'll talk with you in the next one. Until then, let the healing begin and continue.